Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Long Hill Report. I'm Richard Morchoe, and Gus Steeves is here with us
Hello,
today,
how are you?
speaking about the events of the past month and how wonderful they have been. But first of all, I have to mention a tragedy that has happened in my family. Well, actually, it's a tragedy that has happened to me. My family has completely disowned me. I brought up to them, I asked them, did they know why the Norwegian Navy has put barcodes on their ships?
Okay.
And you're laughing. The Norwegian Navy has put barcodes on their ships so that when they return to port, they can Scandinavian. And my family has disowned me over that little story. Now, Gus, would you disown somebody over that?
Being a punster, probably not, no,
But then again, there are those people in the world who are not. Well, we're first going to talk about today something, an event where somebody decided to smack the leadership of another country in the face and possibly tempt them to nuclear war.
Or smack themselves in the face and make themselves look really dumb, one of the two.
Depending on who's running the press, it's always wisdom in that, ladies. Nancy Pelosi took it upon herself to go to the island of Taiwan. Now, the island of Taiwan is an integral part of China. Says who?
The Chinese.
Says the United States.
And the Chinese.
We recognize
And the UN.
Taiwan as being part of China, but we threaten war over it. Or we say we're going to go to the mat for it. And Nancy Pelosi says, I'm going. And I'm waiting for somebody to tell me the real purpose of this.
I think it's a campaign stunt for the most part, more likely than not.
She's only she's got a seat for life.
More or less, but it makes it look, I mean, I think she does it to make herself look good from some of the versions I've read, she did it to make herself look good to her fairly significant Asian population in her district. However, I think a lot of it had more to do to make it look good for the donors she's getting money from. Because probably not coincidentally, she talked to a whole bunch of the big chip manufacturers. What is it, 2 weeks after?
Chips, remember her ice cream thing?
That may be one of them, yes. But I mean, because if you might remember, didn't the Congress pass this gigantic, or is debating this $60 billion bill to help fund
the chip
to underwrite the chip companies?
Well,
and Taiwan has got a whole bunch of them. And she conveniently talked to most of their leadership there while she was there.
Let's make some chips here. Because we let the chip industry go overseas. Let's make the
Well, we didn't let it go overseas. The people who ran the chip industry took it overseas.
Well, because they got a better deal because
our government decided to give them tax breaks to do so. Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all one agglomeration of special interests.
One big happy family.
she was doing something for America.
Yeah.
Now,
right. The problem is her America is about this one.
Yeah. So it's going to, whether it's Ukraine or Taiwan, it serves no purpose for the average American.
No.
And it's money wasted, it's time wasted, and your children will not have a chance at home ownership and family formation. You have a few notes.
I did. And they were actually sparked by the fact that I was reading this recently. And it's a little old, it's from 1996. But it's one of those things that if you ever go to your local library's used book sale, you'll find interesting stuff out there. I can always advertise the local library.
And that's just the Southbridge Library.
Yeah, specifically that one. So, and anyway, so the concept of why I was just reading it is the fact that it's looking at what's going on today in the last 10 years or thereabouts. And reading through his book, David Herman, talking about some of the same, almost exact parallels between what we're seeing today and what was going on in the decade or so prior to World War I. And some of them are like uncannily to the point of being really disturbing parallels. I mean, like he talks about the fact that, as everybody knows today, we saw the Russians basically collapse after 1991.
Yeah.
And with
Soviets. Collapse.
yeah, the Soviet collapse, and the Russians kind of struggled along for a good 15 years thereafter, before Putin came and started rebuilding his country to a large degree. And so, and it's interesting that they saw exactly the same thing with the Russian collapse after the war with Japan in 1904. Almost exactly the same, to the point where the rest of the world basically counted them out, until they started seeing resurgence again about 10 years later. So we're seeing the same thing now. Like we have a situation where back in those days, you had the British Army was basically designed for colonial wars, and not really designed for near-peer wars, which is exactly the same situation we're in.
Right.
Our military is designed for what they call counter-insurgency wars, which essentially are colonial wars.
Right.
And both, as he pointed out, the British back then were seen as a mercenary army without the energy nor the moral value of a truly national soldier, which I think a lot of people would see our army as right now.
Yeah.
And of course, back in those days, we were seeing issues where some of the countries, particularly Russia today, Germany, and Austria-Hungary, in those days, were seeing the risk of war as a necessity for national survival. The Russians have specifically said that.
How did that work out for us?
It didn't work very well at all because they don't exist anymore. But they also, but in some cases, one of the things that I thought was an interesting parallel is that the Austrians had the opportunity, if they wanted to do it, to take out the Serbs several years before they started the war by invading Serbia. They could have probably, by that point, they probably would have won, but they didn't. And that's probably what cost them.
One thing about Serbia, and that might have been the calculation is they would have never got out of a guerrilla war.
That's quite possibly true.
And I think that might have been part of the calculus.
Well, they were probably also already seeing something resembling guerrilla war after they grabbed Bosnia. They were already seeing trouble. Some of Bosnia is Serbian.
Yeah.
And there's a fair
well,
amount
that
of...
was Gavrilo Princip was a Serb who shot the Archduke.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I thought that was an interesting tie-in that, you could almost see our government and specific, well, I wouldn't assume that my brain just went, what was her name? The one who just went to Taiwan? I just went,
Nancy
Pelosi, thank you. Brain fat. Where Pelosi was almost asking for a France Ferdinand moment. She wouldn't have lived through it, but it's almost like the people who were pushing her were almost looking for such a thing, which is craziness.
It is,
and if you keep doing that, you get one eventually.
And that is horribly scary.
Yeah, it's craziness. Absolutely insane.
Intensely scary.
Yeah. So instead, I don't know if you saw the Chinese response.
They started sailing around the island.
Well, they're doing naval exercises for like the next month in various spots all the way around the island, just to show that they can, basically.
You know
Say
what?
that if you keep messing with us, we're just going to take you over, and they would, and they wouldn't have much of a fight.
Probably not. The Taiwanese, it's a very well organized state.
Oh yeah, it is. That's true, and they're well armed because of us mostly.
That they would lose eventually is true, but I kind of think, well, China is a different country than we are.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And I think if you say to an American president or American senator or something, well, don't you think you should be thinking about the long game? They would say, what's the long game?
You mean next year?
In election cycles, election cycles, it's basically a 4-year election cycle.
Yeah.
There is no long game.
No.
Now, we'll be screaming about how President Xi, oh, he's some kind of dictator, blah, blah. Fair enough, maybe he is, but it's China, not the
Yeah.
U.S. They have a history of somebody at the top. It was called an emperor. It doesn't have to be called an emperor, but it could be something similar.
Sure.
And you could say, we don't have to invade next week,
Right.
and we don't have to invade 10 years.
Right.
However, we'll bring up, there's another subject. I think we talked about population last time.
We've done so periodically, yeah.
That if Peter Zion is right, China has a problem. But then again, we probably do too.
Well, I think basically, probably the world as a whole, with climate change and the environmental issues, population as a whole is going to probably crater
Well,
at some various time frames.
It's basically already happening.
It's starting.
Well, it's been happening now. We've been under replacement for years.
Yeah, that's true. And Europe is, and Japan is, and several other countries are going that way quickly.
And Zion
Yeah.
says, oh, you keep quoting Africa,
Mhm.
but every African country games their population figures.
I think most countries probably do.
Well, why they do it and say like Nigeria is, if the Igbo seem to be having less population, they'll goose their census figures.
Mhm.
When the Fulani see that happening, or Hausa see that happening, they goose theirs.
Yeah.
The Yoruba goose. And it happens in all those countries.
Yeah.
So the quote that these people are just sinking the earth with babies may not be completely correct.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, they all have political and financial reasons to doctor the numbers. Unfortunately, anybody that the way our system is set up around the world, everybody has a vested interest in doing that. Really, unfortunately. I mean, our system is designed to be built on perpetual growth in many respects. And if you really start showing that your population is falling, among other things, from a political point of view, that means the sharks start coming out.
Yeah. When you say the sharks are coming, your enemies are going to be coming for you if they see
Could
it?
be, sometimes, yes.
Well,
Sometimes it could just be criminals.
well, that might sort of like Ukraine, Russia,
Yeah.
two declining, population decline, which, the import of that is one thing to discuss, and it's a big discussion.
Yeah.
But basically, recognizing the fragility of population, even in this country,
Oh, absolutely.
we should not be doing anything to really hurt supply chains.
Well, one of the biggest things I would think what we need to be doing is relocalizing and rebuilding the supply chains.
Now that's another thing I have a problem with the we. Is there really such thing as a we?
Well, to some degree, I think there is. It depends. But I think the varying debate that we really need to have is what level is the we at? Whether it would be community or state. I'm not sure the we is much longer at the federal level.
All right, let me do a thought experiment with you that I just came up with. I don't have the answer to it. Just that's not something.
Okay.
Because we're all Bostonians if we came from here, generally speaking, if we're in the Boston area.
Okay.
Most of us are Red Sox fans. Maybe you're not, but
I honestly, I
grew up
don't
as
follow
one.
baseball.
I don't follow
Yeah.
baseball much anymore, but I grew up as one.
I actually grew
And
up
this
as a Yankees fan,
this actually says something about you in the discussion.
Okay.
So we'll get to that. But I mean, I grew up as one.
Okay.
I couldn't sit through a sporting event, through a whole sporting event, probably to save my life now. But I am a Red Sox fan.
Okay.
And like most people in the Boston area, I've been to Fenway Park.
Oh yeah, so have I.
And I've been in crowds. So say you're in a very big crowd in Fenway Park. And the thing about Boston sports fans for the Red Sox are people who've come from here, people from Harvard, people from BU, people from trade school, can all be Red Sox fans,
Oh, yeah.
go to the same
Absolutely.
game
Sure.
and cheer.
Sure.
Now, in those people, how many people would say that? What would be the... Drew, do you know how many fans Fenway Park holds? About 30?
Probably 30-ish.
30,000.
In that 30
40,000?
crowd.
Okay.
how many would be involved in that we you're talking about?
I think it depends on how it's organized.
No, it's
And
just
how
no.
much
I'm
effort.
no. We're not organizing it. We're talking about a Bostonian crowd in there. You know, we're talking about the crowd itself.
But
How
it has
many
to,
in
but the
the
point
people?
is, if you're making an effort like that, it has to be organized.
No,
But it can't.
but
it
it's
can
not. It's
also
not
be,
a we,
Why not?
because you say
Because
it
if you
has to
do it
be
yourself-
organized. You know.
I mean, you can take care of what you need to do for yourself.
Well, no.
but
Okay, just give them a questionnaire about excuse me, seventh inning stretch. Instead of seventh inning stretch, you're going to answer these questions. What do you think about relocalizing? What do you think about the economy here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that works, but other than that, it's not, it has to be organized. You mean it has to be manipulated.
Not necessarily.
How can it not be if it has, how can it not be?
I think it's a lot of it comes down to, partially it comes down to trying to figure out what people want, and really listening to what the everyday people have to say, because our society has been doing a very good job of ignoring that for a long time.
What if they say, what they say is the exact opposite of what you say, you think they want or should want?
Mm-hmm.
What if that happened?
Some of them will.
What?
Some of them probably will.
So then what becomes my question is, what's the point?
And then you work with the people who are willing to do it.
What
let
if
the
they
people
manipulate?
who
What if
are
they
not
say,
willing to do it to do their thing?
yeah, well, then it's not a we.
Provided you're not shooting
But
each
then
other.
it's not
There's
a we.
still a we.
No, it's us versus them.
No, I'm not saying you shoot each other.
I'm not
I'm
saying
saying-
you shoot
I'm
each
saying
other.
you give them-
I'm saying it, but it does become us.
It doesn't have to be us versus
It doesn't
them. It can
have to be,
us
but
and them.
How can that be if
Why
they
not?
have a different?
As long as the attitudes between the two are not
But to
winner
see-
take all and zero sum, you can always build on. Okay, you do your thing, we'll do our thing, they'll do their thing. We'll share what we have in common. We can work together on this, that, and the other thing.
What is it?
We
what if
decide
there's-
not to work together on this, that, and this thing.
And how does that work? I mean, people. I don't see it working. I mean, I basically it's not a we. It will never be a we.
There's always a we. It's just the we is a different size of we.
But okay, so there's so many different ways.
Yeah, that may be the way it works.
Does it work? Maybe it doesn't work.
It has throughout most of human history.
When we've had the history of humanity as wars, civil wars, tribes killing each other.
The vast majority, if you think about the long-term human history, the vast majority of it was actually pretty peaceful. The things that came out and get noticed and written about are the violence.
How often was the Temple of Janus closed?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay, the temple was.
But that's only
the
one
Temple
example.
of Janus was closed in peace.
But that is only
Very
one example.
rarely.
In a
Yeah.
society that was built on war.
Most societies were at one time, and politics. If Clausewitz was right that war is politics by other means, then politics is war by other means.
The only problem is that we are, and I think part of the problem is that we, both of us, and everybody that we know, live in a bubble that assumes that everything, for the most part, is within the bubble. It kind of ties what we were talking about a little while ago before Michael left, about the idea of the fact that, they call it the Overton window. The Overton window is only about this wide, and it's getting narrower. And although in this case, the Overton window is civilization. Whereas the vast majority of human history is not that 10,000 years. The vast majority of human history is something like 500,000 years. Or as we would recognize Homo sapiens, probably 100,000 years. Of human beings doing things that aren't what we would necessarily recognize as quote unquote civilized. But then again, it also doesn't include a lot of the stupidity that we associate with civilization too.
Well, you can't really know in prehistory too much. I mean, look at Etsy.
We don't have
who
any
Etsy
records
was.
of it.
You know who Etsy was? The Bronze Age man. Who walked across
Right.
that.
Okay.
He was murdered.
He may have been.
He had something that killed him that they found in him.
Okay.
I believe.
Okay.
So
He may have been.
I would.
And I'm not saying that they didn't have violence, because some of them did.
The American Indian, you know, I read a lot about King Philip's War, about the settlement of Massachusetts.
Yep.
And Massasoit made a Faustian bargain with the Pilgrims. Why did he make a Faustian bargain with the Pilgrims?
Because his people, the Wampanoags, had been devastated by plague, and they were basically at war with the Narragansetts.
And it was either submit to the Narragansett
or submit to the
Pilgrims.
to people in Plymouth. Yeah.
And but that was Native American culture, war and submission.
Well, part of I think.
But it was also European culture.
Well, that is true, unfortunately. I think part of it is that with that particular situation, I think part of the issue is that the Native American tribes saw themselves separately and did not, but we see them jointly in our society. And then the Europeans saw them basically jointly when they wanted to. But they also saw them separately when they wanted to. Whereas I think a lot of the native tribes at that time, later they came to recognize a commonality. But they saw the English as yet another tribe, more or less.
But it doesn't matter, because they saw it's
with much
coming
more
into the war milieu that they had already had. Okay, here's another tribe. We can ally with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they
there was some of that going on. Yes, I agree.
They didn't get the geopolitical situation that had been changed utterly.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. They didn't have any idea that there were 100 million other Europeans coming down the pike too.
Which gets to my point, as war may be politics by other means, but politics is war by other means, among the Europeans, among us.
Yeah, probably is.
So there's never.
But on the flip side,
you're talking about shifting we's, the we as a concept, we're going to get somebody's going to get the doctorate out of this. But
we get deep into the weeds.
Keep the day unemployment, as my son says to me when I say something, or when I say something about Scandinavians. Basically, how your dilemma is how to not make this a struggle. And,
I agree.
And I think my thought experiment of Fenway Park, you can have every class, race, everything at Fenway Park for a Red Sox game.
Yeah.
You might even go sometime.
I've been there.
And you have been there. Okay.
When I was a kid, yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
so you're a
I
Massachusetts guy. But we also, while we're there, we may be the Red Sox fans, but then we break down into other things. And
True. Yeah, I'm not denying
you can't wield it into one thing.
I think the issue is if you're trying to wield it into one thing constantly, that is almost impossible. I think the issue is trying to bring people together in ways where they overlap when you can. I think, unfortunately, the problem is that the bigger the crowd that you're trying to wield together, the more manipulation there is involved, and the more you are reliant on symbols. But as somebody once said, I think his name was Bajan, the people who live by symbols will die by symbols, because they'll end up getting manipulated into killing each other, and that's the problem, because it's a very fine line between unifying people to think in similar ways over symbols that they can agree on and manipulating them into using symbolism as a weapon.
Well, what is the point of a symbol to begin with?
I think it's the point is it's somebody's idea of a unifying force.
Well, then it's always going to have to be manipulative.
To some degree, and it often is, unfortunately. You're right.
Well, maybe we need to come up with a way of having this, and I use the word we, shoot me.
That's okay. Because
maybe
the
we
real
would
world is
maybe-
not individuals. It's
maybe
multiple people.
It would be a more positive thing if people could live without symbols and could live with reason.
Probably. It probably would be. But then I guess the question then is how do you unify people based on reason without being reliant on...
But to unify, unless it's voluntary and it's organic, is manipulation. Has to be.
That's part of the problem. Exactly. You keep,
It has to be
it keeps
some-
going back to the same issue.
It has to
doesn't
be organic, and I don't see it. I'm not, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see people be always reasonable. I think if my ideas are always reasonable, and a few of yours, I have to concede. You get my point. But that's it. We pilloried Nancy.
Pelosi. Yeah.
And who caused that? Who brought that up and why? It doesn't matter. She was eminently easy to lampoon.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, what good is it? She's part of a big problem. She'll call for democratic unity and things like that. And what good is it?
I think that's part of the problem, is that when you're looking at what the calls of unity are actually being used for.
Okay, now,
And are they really calls for unity, or are they manipulation of the concept of unity?
right,
When behind the scenes, the actual interest is selfish.
I'm kind of stuck in a situation. I'm stuck that I have to defend the Constitution of the United States
Okay.
because I took an oath to do it.
Okay.
I didn't take an oath for a period of time. The oath didn't say that. I was a naive kid.
Okay.
I think the Constitution of the United States is flawed.
Yeah, it is.
But I
It is.
understand it's, and I think it really needs a lot to be changed.
It does.
Along my ideas. But, and I'm not, okay, so I wrote one book, and I'm working on another millennium for another book. I think my ideas are, but we're not unifying. It's not an idea about unifying anybody. It's an idea of what we can accept.
Okay.
That's the Constitution.
Yeah, I get that.
And the Constitution was actually a very manipulative document.
Yeah, it was.
Both the plutocrat and the slave owner worked together to get what they needed.
Yeah.
It almost didn't pass in Massachusetts and many other states, and they had to promise a Bill of Rights, which is an anti-federalist thing.
Did you know that there was actually a First Amendment, the First Amendment that we don't see in the Constitution?
And what was that?
It would have limited the size of U.S. representative districts to 50,000. And from what I have read, it actually passed. Because the last state to ratify it was Connecticut, but it kind of never formally got handed on. So that in the record, supposedly from what I've read, and I've never actually gone to look for it, that supposedly it's in the state archives down in Connecticut, is apparently a signed copy of that First Amendment that would have had it ever been passed into Congress would have been formally ratified as the First Amendment.
Which brings up something. We have, what are they, 600,000 people per rep now?
Right now, I think it's running around 750.
750.
But it varies a little bit depending on where you are.
How many? So if you have 30,000, you're having about, what did you say, 30,000 or 50,000?
No, originally it was about 50,000.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you limit it to 50,000, what do you have? You'd have to increase the size of the House of Representatives to make it
A lot.
a lot more ridiculous than it is now. So that's another dilemma that,
True, but on the flip side, if you have more representatives and you set it up right, you actually have far more actual access to government. As it is right now, You know,
You know that-
you look at the size of the current district that we're in.
Yes.
You know, is there really that much commonality between Southbridge and Charlton or Williamsburg or Coleraine? Colerane's a nice little town. I've driven through it, but there's
Yeah.
nobody there.
Yeah. Well, you know, for any representative district, there's a lot of other people in that. So yeah, but it's even so. I think it's just the point of how difficult this is,
Sure.
and
And maybe that goes back to one of the issues that I know I've thought about a lot is the issue of size. You know, we really lose the actual practice of democracy the larger you get.
well, of course, Aristotle said, basically, he said that 5,000. I think he was quoted as 5,000 is the limit for an electoral.
Really?
I'm not going to stand by that.
I'm not familiar with that
But the, you
specific
know,
number, but
because we are getting the high sign from certain people that we are absolutely terribly irresponsible. So thank you for coming to the Long Hill Report. Richard Morchoe and Gus Steeves solving your problems again.